you want to do the thing?
Well, I think it's already done. It's rolling.
All right, it's rolling. Okay, well, here we are again. It's the Impact Narrative, and it's the last day in January. It's the end of the transfer window.
It's transfer deadline day, everyone. You didn't wear your yellow tie.
My yellow tie.
The Sky Sports News theme.
Ah.
It's on transfer deadline day. Everything is yellow.
Okay, right. I'll take your word for it.
Yeah. Avoid it, obviously. And it's the day after the State of the Union, Mark.
Well, it's a few hours after the State of the Union address. Yeah, big media event. I'm sure that there was a big audience. I haven't seen the figures, but the performer was somebody who seems to be quite newsworthy, and he gave his usual, well, I don't know, quite a slightly toned down address, I thought.
Right, okay.
But the funniest thing about it was the raucous reception he got, which is kind of traditional for these events.
How many standing ovations did he get? How many times was he interrupted?
Oh, it was just every line virtually was applauded, but the Democrats were all in their seats apparently, and the Republicans were all showing incredible enthusiasm, and we'll just see whether those same people are still applauding when it comes to the midterm elections. But they're clearly thinking, well, what else can they do? They've got to just cheer him to make sure he performs quite well, because obviously if people don't cheer, I don't think that man performs.
Well, I think before we get on to the content, Mark, I think we need to just provide a bit of context to the State of the Union, which is, obviously it's an important sort of stock take of the year and how the US has done and where it's moving forward in the year ahead. But it's also a performance. It's a real important performance where the leader will be bombastic in his rhetoric, say his rhetoric, of course, for obvious reasons.
Yes.
But the people in the audience also have a role to play in terms of being very bombastic in their applause. They would regularly, routinely, if you will, interrupt the speaker with standing ovations, and that's often gauged as the success of the speech, the number of standing ovations that the performer gets. And I think that it tells you a lot about the unity between the president and party, and in US politics there's a history of division between the two. So I think it's quite interesting in this case that you have a deep schism between the president and a large percentage of the Republican Party, but yet from what you're saying that the Republicans got on board with what he was saying, seemingly. Oh
yes, and obviously what you can do in these addresses is to be very selective, and the economic news does seem generally to be good.
Right.
And so you had a lot of good tunes to sing.
Excellent.
And again,
good.
And the party is hoping, obviously, unless something really strange happens, he will lead the party into it's not like in the Conservative Party where Mrs May is permanently on probation. Mr Trump, unless strange things happen, will be the president at the time of the midterm elections, and so the Republicans they've gotten basically it's compulsory to cheer him to the rafters.
So what you're saying is that even if they don't necessarily agree with his politics or his behaviour or his role as president, for their own sake, they have to get on board, they have to have a rally round the flag type effect, they have to show that they are wholeheartedly supporting his message. And in doing so, perhaps, potentially alienating a number of the more centrist Republicans.
Well, possibly, but I think, again, that's why he was not quite on... We haven't mentioned his name yet. It's called Trump, isn't he?
I think so.
It's like people have this terrible habit of talking about B. Johnson as Boris. With Trump, you just need to say he, really, and you know who you're talking about. But I think that's why the message was not quite as, to use the word of the day, bombastic as usual. And there was a bit of sabre rattling towards North Korea, but generally, he's peddling the America First line, and talking about the amounts of money which have been flowing out of America because of its trade imbalance, and he's going to put that right and whatever. All those things are kind of electorally popular themes that he was talking about, and he wasn't being provocative, and he wasn't, so far as I can remember, because I drifted in and out of it, wasn't really being partisan in a negative way, which of course is the thing that he's best at, is saying that he'll lock up his opponents or whatever. Much less of that and much more, even though of course in recent days there's been the conflict between Democrats and Republicans in Congress, but it was far more about the positive message.
Okay, well, that's interesting. It shows that maybe his advisors have realised that there is serious discord in the US and within the political system broadly.
Absolutely, and he was flanked by Paul Ryan and Mike Pence, the kind of the symbol, I suppose, of the Republican Party rallying behind its leader, but it is in the end a hollow kind of rallying because they've got no alternative.
Exactly. Yeah. If they want to survive as the grand old party, they need to show this unity right now.
Yeah.
Even though there isn't unity.
Yeah, but there is. I would say that probably there's enough for them to rally around. This is the thing again. The contrast with poor old Theresa May is that the big issues in Britain, there really isn't any good news at all for Theresa May. They keep saying the economy is doing incredibly well, but of course it's doing reasonably all right-ish. And we hear output of cars has gone down in the last year. All these indicators that there is a great deal of uncertainty in the economy. So she hasn't even got that to talk about.
Sure.
Whereas at least Trump has got the stock market keeps on. It had a bad day yesterday, but that was it's notable because it's the first bad day in months.
Right.
And there is, I think, a feel-good factor in America in terms of the economy. And also, of course, Trump was talking about spending billions on infrastructure. And you could see this, again, as being part of the same thing, that what he's doing is almost an old-fashioned Keynesian type boom he's engineering. And you can see a good argument for what he's doing, that in fact America, obviously the dollar being the sheet anchor of the world economy, its value is a matter of concern for all countries or whatever.
Sure.
But what his strategy does seem to be to redress the balance of payments problems that, so America is going to start being a manufacturing giant rather than sucking in everyone else's imports, and that does make a great deal of sense.
Yeah, it certainly does. And that's
which is strange. We've said a great deal of sense and Trump in the same sentence.
Who saw that coming? I certainly didn't think that was going to be a theme of today's discussion.
Well, obviously, the North Korea stuff doesn't make any sense at all, so he balanced it.
Okay,
it was a balanced address.
Okay, we'll get on to North Korea in a minute. I think it's interesting, this talk of infrastructure, because we know he likes his basic infrastructure. We know he likes building walls, or at least
golf
talking
courses.
About building walls, and that's quite interesting. Was there much talk of dealing with the migration crisis that he's identified?
No. I think again, this is a bit. Perhaps I didn't, and our viewers will know all of this sort of thing. The big thing at the moment is these people called the Dreamers, the people who kind of arrived in America illegally, quite young and ambitious, and all this kind of thing. And again, my take on it was that his tone was a lot less pugilistic. Pugilistic and bombastic are the two words that you could.
They certainly are.
And you could almost say that he's growing into the role of president.
Well, let's wait and see.
No mention of Russia, whereas of course in Britain we're hearing all the time at the moment that Russia is trying to bring down civilization.
Well, there was a report earlier this week that suggested that that Russian forces were behind a pro-KKK rally that took place, and at the same time they were also behind the very same anti-KKK rally that took place in the same place. So there's an interesting suggestion that Russian forces are acting in a somewhat nefarious way.
Yes, but there's nothing new about this at all. But that's one thing, I think, since our last meeting, that was it the Russian defence minister or somebody anyway who was saying who name-checked Monty Python. Did you see that?
I didn't.
That Gavin Williamson, our meteoric defence secretary, whose career already, because he, again, we'll have to be careful here, but he seems to have leaked information about his private life, which, if it had come out without him being in control of it, might have been a little bit problematic for him, and he's trying to deal with things that way. But he made remarks about Russia's intentions, and said that it could cause thousands of deaths by meddling with our infrastructure and things like that. Right. Whereupon this official in Russia said that it sounded like a Monty Python sketch. And it's good. It just shows that our soft power has expanded. Yeah, Monty Python, if there are any of them who, obviously Graham Chapman no longer with us, but if there are any unknighted members of Monty Python, I think really the establishment should get...
I think so too.
Because clearly, obviously, it's very popular in America, but Russia as well. Monty Python is the way of spreading... Well, the joke being, of course, that Monty Python spent most of the time poking fun at Britain.
Exactly.
Our soft power is being increased by a programme which pokes fun at how silly Britain is.
So some states across the world are investing in Premier League football clubs.
Others
are
talk about that
investing in big charity organisations or other sports. What they need to do is invest in comedy shows.
Well, it would have to be original, and that's the problem. There aren't any of those anymore. But
Exactly.
you want us to talk about investing in football, like Arsenal investing heavily in...
Moving on, British politics.
Yeah, oh, no. Well, British politics, well, nothing
Before we
changed.
get
No
on to,
changes there. Except Theresa May, obviously, is more and more now under threat from... and the thing is, of course, what happens here, it just shows that in various ways, because the Conservative Party in the 1970s, 80s was saddled with a leadership system, choosing the leader, which meant that there would have to be a leadership election if two members of the parliamentary party were prepared to stand forward to oppose the leader. In other words,
as candidates.
No, you just needed somebody to be proposed, a proposer of a candidate and a seconder. That's all you needed.
Right,
so when Margaret Thatcher was toppled, when she was nearly when she was challenged in the late 1980s by Sir Anthony Mayer, it was just Ian Gilmore, somebody I knew well, who nominated Anthony Mayer, and there was one person who seconded, and the names didn't have to be public.
Right, okay.
And so it was complete anarchy. So in the end, Thatcher was obviously somebody nominated and seconded Michael Heseltine in 1990, and that led to her departure. Well, since then, the Tory party have tried to make it much harder to get rid of the leader. However, you've got to have a certain percentage, 20% or something, of the parliamentary party has to write a letter to the chairman of the 1922 committee.
And just for people unfamiliar with the 1922 committee?
Well, it's a backbench committee. It's really just a forum for Tory backbenchers and there's a famous line by an old Tory MP called Julian Critchley, who said that there was an iron law of the 1922 committee that whenever it met, the first two people who spoke at the 1922 committee meeting were mad.
Right.
That's the sort of iron rule.
Excellent.
But it's kind of by definition, the first two people who spoke had to be. Anyway, where are we?
The 1922 committee gets a lot of press. It
does
seem to be the power behind the Tory party.
But it isn't. There's no power in the Conservative Party anymore. And it is, as I say, just a forum for views to be expressed. And the chair of the maybe allegedly, but the chair, Graham Brady, is the chair of the 1922 committee, doesn't want to have a leadership contest pretty clearly, but he's receiving letters from Tory MPs saying we want a leadership contest. But what then happens, very briefly, is there has to be a vote of confidence in the leader. So it's almost like the leader then, it's almost like a show trial of the leader. So what you can have under this system is a smallish proportion of Tory MPs humiliating the leader, and the worst thing is that the leader will be very badly damaged by it, but will win the vote of confidence, in which case there's no election. But if they lose the vote of confidence, they resign, and then there's the bloodbath of a leadership contest. So the party is utterly barking.
Right. So
utterly barking. Because if they were going to move against Theresa May, that was straight after the election. What we've got now is several months down the line after the election, in which the party has really just damaged itself and damaged its leader, to bringing about we all know Theresa May isn't going to lead the party into the next general election. That's all done and dusted. But there was a theory that she should lead the party through the Brexit process and then step aside, having done her duty or whatever. Well, it does look as if her position is going to be untenable a lot faster, and that means that somebody else is going to have to carry the can. And the again the irrationality of the party, that there, it seems that there is a faction within the party which is determined to interpret the referendum result as a vote for cancelling really all ties with Europe. In other words, a hard Brexit.
Sure.
And well, I mean that's just made up. It's fake
exactly.
news. People voted for a whole load of reasons, but. And a load of people obviously didn't realise the trade implications, but all the opinion polls suggest that the country is still very much divided, and of the people who want to leave, the number who would like a hard Brexit, you just can't calculate it, but it can't be anything like a majority of the country. So it is part of this process I mentioned last week that the Conservative Party is becoming UKIP.
Yep. And one of the key proponents of this move is a chap called Grant Shapps, the former chairman of the party. And, coincidentally, someone who used to follow me on Twitter.
Ah, right, well.
Of all people, Grant Shapps.
Yeah,
this is when he was chairman of the party.
I would take that as a high compliment.
Would you?
But at least you're not being followed by Jacob Rees-Mogg, because that might be
not.
it. I mean, there's again,
Strangely.
bless him. The thing about Jacob Rees-Mogg, lots of people thought maybe he was a sort of a figure of fun. A lot of people who weren't conservatives thought he was a figure of fun.
Much like they did with Boris Johnson.
Well, I think people thought, and again, I've been criticised for saying that Jacob Rees-Mogg was like Boris Johnson without the baggage, because Boris Johnson obviously has got very, very serious enemies, whereas everyone does seem to like Jacob Rees-Mogg, and he does articulate. He's fearless, completely fearless. He says exactly what he thinks. The trouble is, what he thinks is again an interpretation of the referendum which is very eccentric, but also he has unfortunately got the kind of accent and demeanour which opens him to the obvious criticism that he isn't really in touch with the modern world. And yet the party is seriously contemplating having this person who deserves to be prominent as a kind of agitator within the party.
Sure.
He's proved that he is extremely eloquent, etc. However, electorally, you could really, it would be difficult to think. He's almost like out of central casting as somebody who's going to make the Conservative Party look out of touch.
Exactly, and just to really hammer home this point, if you remember the Ali G show, Mark?
I do indeed.
In the Ali G show, Ali G, the character, he went and interviewed someone about the upper class, about etiquette and things like that, and the person that he chose to interview
was
Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Otherworldly is, but
it's available on YouTube for anyone who's not seen it. It's a wonderful clip, but really hammers home this point about the extent to which he could represent a united Britain.
Yeah, right. Well, oh dear. Well, you see, this is the point that if that was used by the Labour Party in a broadcast or whatever, it would divide people, because some would probably, because he is very articulate, some people might be, in fact, rather impressed by him. However, if it's part of a general charge that the Conservative Party doesn't really speak for, certainly for youth, then, well, you couldn't think of a better. It's almost like he's already written the script for the Labour Party. But having said that, Ali G had an encounter also with Tony Benn, the great hero of certain people we know, the great left-wing leavers. And Tony Benn was a bit bemused by that, I think. And he probably would have looked just as much out of touch as...
Well, Rees-Mogg was less bemused, but I think he played along with it.
Yeah, well, there we go. There's an awful lot to say for this person, but there's not an awful lot to say for him as a potential Prime Minister.
No.
So anyway.
Mark, I'm going to put you on the spot now. When you talked about a bloodbath, when do you think the bloodbath is going to happen?
Well,
we've had these conversations away from the impact narrative a number of times now.
We have, but again, but what I felt was that, in a way, that Theresa May was strangely untouchable, because her position was so bad that nothing could make it worse. And therefore, the obvious thing you would say is that this is a leader whose position is extremely vulnerable, and all you need is one more bit of bad news and she's gone. Sure. Well, I think what it more is that what a lot of people think is the only sensible compromise, in other words, Britain is out of the EU but still has some very close trading relationship which involves, because in the end, it's going to involve Britain having to abide by regulations passed by the EU. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to trade with the EU. This is what, and so that kind of compromise position is one which is increasingly annoying to people like Rees-Mogg. So instead of it being bad news that's going to take her down, it's actually this Brexit process moving in the only logical direction, which is towards what one would call a soft Brexit.
Sure.
Yeah. So it keeps being kicked slightly into the long grass. Transitional arrangements. We still haven't agreed on what the transitional arrangements are going to be.
I'm going to stop you here. I'm going to be Paxman.
Okay.
When? Give me a date, Mark.
Well, no, I'm not. All I'll say is Alistair Cook, next time he bats, will prod outside the off stump and be caught by Alexis Sanchez, who's just suddenly been transferred to Australia to play.
Wonderful.
I haven't a clue, but it does look, and she gave an interview, she's in China at the moment, and she gave an interview which sounded very much like somebody on the ropes, or at least being quoted in that way, and her saying...
we're mixing our sporting metaphors here.
Well, it's the same business really, isn't it?
Slip by a footballer whilst she's on the ropes.
So it could, this vote of confidence thing could be triggered over, if there's no hardening of the tone from Theresa May about Brexit, then it could happen at any time. And there were rumours that there are more people about to send letters in. But as I say, the process is horrible for the Conservatives. And somebody is going to have to say to her, look, you're going to have to, why don't you now just step aside without, because the vote of confidence thing will be protracted. Ian Duncan Smith, there's a hilarious thing with Ian Duncan Smith, ancient history, but back in, 2003, when Ian Duncan Smith was put on the spot with a vote of no confidence.
This is
and loads
a
of people.
man.
And what happened was that loads of people who wanted rid of him voted for him to spare him a humiliation. And so it was actually what they did. They almost got together, it seems to me, and decided what the result was going to be. And then they said, right, you lot vote for Duncan Smith because you know it's safe to do so. And that's exactly, of course, the kind of thing which got Labour Jeremy Corbyn, people voting tactically in this, it's not sensible. So I think what they'll do is try and avoid it by asking Mrs May to do the decent thing. But, I mean, for the sake of the Conservative Party, I really hope that doesn't happen, because then there will be the most horrendous bloodbath. Because this Gavin Williamson clearly thinks that he's going to be leader. Jeremy Hunt thinks that he could be leader. Then Rees-Mogg, Boris Johnson is going to have to go. Be hilarious if Michael Gove throws. Michael Gove seems to have decided he's going to be the right-hand man to B. Johnson. So that's all, despite their rocky relationship.
Well,
it's horrible, horrible, horrible. And the only person who'll be lapping it up, although the opinion polls still show Labour only just ahead of the Conservatives, but the point is the Conservative support must be getting softer and softer. People actually turning out to vote for this party is very difficult to imagine, just as things are. So I think the opinion polls, although they may overstate Labour's position, they probably overstate the Conservative position as well.
Of course.
Anyway.
Well, Mark, we're rapidly running out of time, and I just want to touch on a different way of getting political leadership.
Is that the James Bond thing?
No, it's not.
Right.
No. Although there was a story this week about the role of James Bond in the #MeToo movement, and the extent to which Bond and the character of Bond and his history, his baggage, has a role to play, and it's a really interesting discussion about the role of such a misogynistic character in today's world, and well worth a read, certainly worth thinking about. But no, I was talking about Saudi Arabia and the new book that's come out about the Trump administration by Michael Wolff.
Oh yes, is that going to be Book of the Week?
Fire and Fury.
Indeed, I think people have heard of that.
I believe so. And there's some interesting comments in there about Saudi Arabia, and it suggested that Trump had manipulated events in Saudi.
With the help of Russia, of course.
Well, I'm not quite so sure about that, but...
well, no, you can't manipulate without permission from the Kremlin.
Okay, so Trump had manipulated it and
right.
made sure that Mohammed bin Salman, the new crown prince, was positioned in such a way that that he would be the power behind the throne and ultimately the next king. And it's revealed in Wolff's book that Trump commented that our man is now in the right place. We've got our man to the right place.
Yeah,
which is quite interesting, because the first official trip of the Trump administration after getting elected was to Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, and there's an interesting relationship burgeoning between Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, and the Saudis, and potentially the Israelis as well.
Yeah.
And the political dynamics in Saudi have been seriously evolving in the past couple of weeks, with a purge that resulted in a number of prominent officials
Being held in hotels.
in a hotel prison. There were, I think, 11 prominent princes, including the richest man in Saudi Arabia, who were imprisoned, and then 200 businessmen imprisoned, allegedly for corruption charges. Now this, if Trump's comments are to be believed, and if Wolf's account is to be believed, was something that was orchestrated by the
Well, I
Trump
say,
administration.
he's growing into the role of US President. This is what US Presidents do.
They manipulate events in the Middle East.
Indeed, as we know.
Yes, as we know.
All the Shah's men and all that kind of thing.
Indeed.
But, well, yeah, no, that kind of surprises me, because it's working, isn't it?
Well,
His plan is working.
it is if you're
So that's
of that
very surprising.
mindset. So
Well, no, it's working. I mean, you know, because the events that he hopes, his man is
certainly
poised to...
strengthening his position.
Yeah.
Of course, that's having serious repercussions across the region, for the war in Yemen, for the escalation of events in Syria. I mean, the Yemen crisis is tragic on a scale not seen anywhere since the Second World War. It will lead to the destruction of the country unless some drastic action is taken. But that's maybe a conversation for another time, Mark, because we are out of time.
We are we? All right,
We
so
are.
no time to talk about Arsenal.
No time at all.
Oh.
So, as always, please do follow us on all of the various
Or
social
Newcastle.
media channels.
By this time tomorrow, Newcastle will have bought no players.
Exactly. And will still not have been taken over.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. And of course, by this time tomorrow, we'll have lost to Burnley 2-1.
2-1.
We usually manage to score,
Okay.
but not as many goals as the other side, which, under the crooked system we have, means that you lose.
Strange, that. Strange. Anyway, you can subscribe below, down here, I believe, somewhere. YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, all the usual things. Oh, and Instagram too. We have an Instagram page. So do all of that. Share this video, please, and we'll be back with you for a new impact of the Impact Narrative, or TIN, as I believe a hashtag is going around,
Ah,
next week. So from both of us, adieu.
goodbye.